Okay, so we're asking the children. They're going to go down. So while they do that, I feel like I should preface this and say I'm not much of a preacher. I always start out with that because even though I'm sister to Brian Calendar, I don't talk nearly as much as he does. Right? So I tend to preface it with I'm not the preacher in the family. So feel free to interact with me. It'll be a little bit more informal this morning, even though I'm here at the pulpit. I believe I'm sharing what God would have wanted me to share today. So, any favorite characters in the Bible that you may have? Does anybody have any favorite characters in the Bible? Yes? Which one?
David. David. Yeah.
Okay.
Peter.
I ain't heard nobody say Paul yet. Paul is not one of my favorite ones because Paul is very, very strict. Paul will get that little bit and he will hit you your back with it until you get your life together. It's good for when you want to learn things, but it's also bad for if you want to be hit back. And I know that. Minister Rennick talked about that 2 weeks ago, right? So we need to get ourselves together so Paul becomes our favorite. Right? And Gideon as well? Yes. The only part that I don't like about Gideon is that he was a little old when he promised. And that always bothered me. I was like, you mean not 47, 57, you got to be over there taking territory? What really going on? But that was not, that was why he was not my favorite. So some of my favorites are, I tend to stay in the J's. I like James, I like John, and I like Jonathan. But the one that we're going to be talking about today that I also like is Joshua. So, our theme for this year is the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. And I thought to myself, what could possibly lead into the manifestations of the Holy Spirit? I've been thinking about that the entire year. Like what do I as a person have to do? Because if I am not doing the things that Jesus did, because in his verse he said that we will do greater things than him, then it has to be a failing of mine. That's how I look at it. It has to be something that I have not done, that this has not been released to me. So, also, at the beginning of the year, I got a prophecy. I won't tell you what it is. But that's another thing. I was like, the fact that this has not been released to me means that I have not done something or I should be doing something. So for this year, I told myself, well, you have to learn better to do better. So I've been training to learn better. That's part of the reason why I come to Be the Purpose. That's part of the reason why I'm reading a lot more. As even Elder Val gave me some of the reading. I was like, boy, the Lord is really be talking to his servants because she needs to learn something a little bit more. So I read reading that as well. And I told myself, like I said, if I don't have it, that means I'm not ready for it. So I have to get ready. So this is part of it, getting ready. So Joshua was a faithful servant without seeking attention. And he was consistent in private before being elevated in public. And he was also a model of transformation. So that's why we are talking about him today, right? So let's talk about 3 stages that Joshua went through. The first one is Joshua the servant. So the first time we meet Joshua is in Exodus 17:9. And the word talks about how Moses gave him a task and he just did it. And it's also, at that time, he was just Moses' servant. As much power as he supposedly had, and as much power as we think about of Joshua, he started out as Moses' servant, and only his servant. So whatever Moses said to get, he would get. Wherever Moses went, he would go. He would hand him things. He would do things for him. He was one of those people who helped Moses when he needed help. And it wasn't a glamorous job. You can imagine you walking about behind a man and he just telling you what to do. And that's all you do every day, all day. And then you go to bed at night and wake up and do it the next day. So essentially, he was a basic assistant. The Bible describes him as an assistant. And we all know what an assistant does. They do that. They walk around behind people. They do what you need done. And they help you as you need. So Joshua the servant had some of these qualities. And they thought they were important for us to pay attention to. So the first one is humility. People who have humility do not act as benefactors. They don't act as if they are owed something. They are grateful for it if they get it, but they don't lord themselves over other people. They don't behave as though it belongs to me and that I should have it, so give it to me. No, they wait their turn. They also have sacrificial love. They also have faithfulness, which we see here on the screen. And one of the things about being faithful is that it requires you to consistently do the same thing every day. So remember we talked about Joshua being Moses' servant. So there was nothing glamorous in that. There was nothing that says, hey, you will be elevated, but he still did it because he understood the call on Moses' life and that it was important that he have somebody to help him. So you need to be dependable in all these small situations. Dependable means that if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. There's also a verse which talks about when the Israelites were tricked for protection or coverage. And I like that one because they upheld their word regardless of what the situation was. So even though somebody tricks you, which is why you shouldn't sign every and anything without reading it, right? The Bible talks about that as well. You're supposed to uphold what is done. Once you say it, it should be so. Therefore, somebody should never come to you as God's child and say, you are saying you're going to do things, but you don't do them. That's not who we are. If we say we're going to do it, we do them. And we do them to the best of our ability. And we don't do them with ungrateful heart, or we don't do it angry because you've agreed to it. So how you could be angry that the person now requiring you to do what you say you was going to do? So therefore, that's what we need to do. Faithful. You also should have integrity if you're going to be a servant. And Jesus really embodied this one. There was nothing that Jesus did that was outside of his purpose. There were things that people asked him to do that he probably wasn't right to do. If you remember when Mary asked him to change the water into wine, he told her, but it's not my time yet, but he still did it. So it was within his purpose because it built people for him, right? So we have to have integrity as we walk along. That means we have to have character. Our character should be falling within all that God requires of us. Are there any characteristics that I can ask you that God requires of us? Forgive me, I walkable. When I teach, I walkable, okay? Just accept it for what it is. So, what God may require of us, what kind of qualities, what kind of characteristics may God require of us that we should be given easily? Love. So I'm glad you start with that one. Because that's one, to me, that's one of the harder ones. But it's also the basis of everything that we do. If you do not love people, how can you love God? The Bible talks about that as well. If you do not care for one another, how can we treat one another well? It will not, like, eventually you're going to fall. Like, even if you put on a mask today and you say, I'm going to treat everybody with love today because I know it's supposed to, and I'm kind of doing it. But tomorrow, you ain't doing it again because you ain't get tired. Anybody who's ever been in a relationship, and anybody tell you one thing, and then by 6 months later doing something completely different, you're like, but at the beginning you did this. Because they were putting their best foot forward, the required foot forward. But you find out who people are over time. So therefore, if we don't actually believe in sacrificial love, if we don't actually give it, if we don't actually commit to doing it, then there's nothing that will keep us doing it for all days of our life. Eventually, we're going to stop. Right? And then obedience. Sometimes I struggle with this one. I'm not going to lie. Because sometimes the obedience requires something of you that is not, it may not even be bad. It may just, I'll tell you a story. So a time I was at school and I was living with a friend of mine, and another friend of, well, the friend was a friend of hers, and that person got a really major accident, and she was in the hospital and she was doing very poorly. And I was praying about it, and I was like, God, but this girl's so young. This is not good. Like, she needs to, like, we need to get her better. And the Lord told me that my friend was going to visit her. And I am to tell her to stand up on her right side and to use her right hand on her as she's praying. And he was like, you're going to pray at the exact same time as she prays when she laid her right hand on this woman. And I was like, not me. That just sounds very weird to me. I'm not doing it. Like, what would be person? I pray home. I'm not visiting her. I pray home. What's the purpose of that? I was like, you hear what I tell you? Because God talked to me like that. Because I hard ears. So he's talking to me like a very chill sometimes. He was like, you hear what I tell you? I was like, I heard what you said. But about that, can we talk about it? Can we negotiate? So obviously, you know when God done says something, he done. You heard it. You understood it. He is not saying it again. But you're talking to him because you're his child. So you know what he says and you know what you're supposed to do. So I said, I'm not doing this. I felt very uncomfortable. Up to the point the girl that going through the door, I felt uncomfortable. And I was like, all right, all right, all right. I can tell she. So I told her. And she was just like, oh yeah, cool. I went along. I was like, after all that, it wasn't even a bother to. She didn't even look back like, what weirdness, this girl telling me nothing. So once she went to the hospital, she called me, and then it was like, all right, let me pray. I'll be praying for the young lady. She got better, of course, because that's what God required of us. But sometimes the obedience, like I said, sometimes it's a struggle because you may not understand what is happening. You may not understand what God is trying to tell you, but He is giving you direction because it is the best for you and the persons around you. The other one is compassion. I feel like I'm telling all of my business today. But compassion is another one we have to have for other people. Sometimes that's also a struggle for me because I be like, but you know, right, do right. That's just my personality. If you know it, you do it. If you ain't know it, then you can't do it, right? But if you know it, do it. But others sometimes will struggle with a particular thing, just like me. And you have to have compassion on them. You have to see the sick and be worried about them. You have to warn them. You have to see the hungry and be, burdened by their issues so that we can do something for them. Because if we don't feel compassion for others, we will never do anything. It will just be like, oh, that's another thing. That's another thing that's happening. Oh, whatever. Whatever. We walk across the street and we're not. But we know that the reason why we are still here and not with the Lord in our mansions is because there are people down here who need help. Right? Or else we will go. So there's something that we have to do. So we need to look around, we need to be compassionate, and we need to see what it is that others need. Closer. No problem. Alrighty. So in terms of courage, we also have to have courage. I think that comes back to the same thing I was talking about just now with, whether or not the person's going to view you weird or the person's going to do this thing. So you need to have courage. So servants do have courage, and these are some of the strong, especially if you want to be a leader. Everybody tends to want to be a leader. That's what God created us to be. So we always seek after leadership. But one of the things, the first thing that a leader has to do is learn to be a servant. So let me tell you this back to Joshua. Joshua was Moses' servant, right? He was the one who was doing all of the humiliating tasks for Moses. All the things that nobody else wanted to do. And in that moment, the Bible never mentions that Moses was growing him. Well, it never mentions outright that Moses was growing him to be his successor. The Bible doesn't say that. It just says he was his assistant. So in that time, Joshua did not know that he was going to be Moses' successor, that he was going to be the person who led the Israelites into the promised land. Because God had not revealed that at that time to either of them. So neither of them know. So you are to act within this servanthood in anticipation of the things that God is going to do. And even if He does not do it, because these things are so good to do, we still do it. Right? So let's move on. Let's look at, I think it was Exodus 33, 7 to 11. The focus is on verse 11, but I'll read for you from 7. So now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of the meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of the meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances of their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they all stood and worshipped, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses was returned to camp, but his young aide Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. So even though the Lord was not coming down to talk to Joshua, Joshua was like, hey, this is some place to be. Because if God is coming down as a friend to Moses and speaking face to face with him, I want to be there. I want to be in God's presence. I want to know what he is doing. I want to know what he's saying to me. I am not even the primary. I'm not the leader. I don't, like, that's neither here nor there. I need to be in God's presence. And that's the most important part. So he stayed in the tent long after Moses. Moses realized that he was staying in the tent. And Moses might have been thinking to himself, wow, this man, he wants to know God. He wants to hear from God for himself. He wants to spend time in God's presence. And that's important for us. Joshua, even not being the leader, even not being the person in charge, even not being the one who would have gotten all the things, and because God is coming out in a cloud to speak to Moses face to face. God has not spoken to somebody face to face, I think, in the Bible since Adam and Eve. But he's coming out to talk to Moses. And all Joshua was doing was seeking God for himself. He was saying, hey, I want to be in this tent. I want to be this place where God is. And that, in spending time with God, God would have elevated it. So the first thing he started out as the servant. Remember, he's just doing the normal menial tasks. He's just following up behind Moses. But then he goes on to something else. So the next time we see Joshua in any great capacity, besides the fight with the Amalekites, it's when he becomes the spy. So let's look at the spy. So what characteristics do we have of the spy? So the spy has extreme discretion. So that means you're not walking about telling everybody business. Somebody comes and tells you a secret, you're like a vault, right? They have extreme discretion. They're not talking everything, they're not seeing everything, they're not shouting, they're not loud. A spy is never the loudest person in the room. They aren't the quietest person in the room because they're trying to fit in, but they aren't the loudest person in the room. They don't want to draw undue attention to themselves. So extreme discretion. High emotional intelligence, which means you're not stepping out of bounds. You're not hurting people for hurting people's sake. You're wary of what you see. You always guard what it is that you're seeing and doing. You have the best interpersonal skills. So that means if somebody comes at you and they're loud, you know that you don't respond with loudness. You have to quiet them down. Right? So you know that interacting with those persons. That's one of the tools, by the way, of anybody who's having a mental break and they're very, very loud and aggressive. Whisper to them. It confuses them. So you're not supposed to speak at even a conversational level. If somebody's loud and aggressive, you bring it down because they respond to that. Mental discipline and resilience. So remember we saw that before when Joshua was talking about he's staying in the tent. We saw that from the servant. Remember, he was always in the tent. So mental discipline and resilience means that bad things happen, you are able to cope. So one of the things that I do with my students is we have an exercise that I do in terms of when you come up against something difficult, what it is that you are supposed to do. Because difficulties will happen in life, and we know that they will happen across the board. Sometimes you will do the wrong thing. I remember when I was an intern, unfortunately, there was this young lady who came in post-surgery, and I was supposed to take out some stitches. And I cut the end of the stitch before looking for the other end. And so I could not find the other end of the stitch. And I was like, Jesus, what is that happened to me? So I am there so I had to call my senior. Then that person had to slightly open up the cut in order to find the other end. That was a mistake, right? So sometimes in life you make mistakes. You don't intentionally do them. Because in my mind, I was like, there's always an other end. There is never not another end. So of course I'm going to cut the most visible one and go find the other one quickly and let her go ahead. But that was not the case. So sometimes what we have to do is understand that we will make mistakes. So we have to have the mental discipline and resilience to be able to move past those mistakes. Adaptability and situational awareness. So of course you have to be aware of your situation. Pastor asked us, it was last week, I think it was the week before we were in Pain to Purpose. What will happen if all of the world is against you? If you are in a room and you know that nothing that you say is going to be received, why would you continue seeing it? Situational awareness, right? So we have to think about things like that. Those people may not be willing to hear what you're saying, but somebody else may be. And it's okay. You don't have to get angry. You don't have to fight. You don't have to, I am here and I have something to say. You don't have to do that. Because, it's not going to be received anyway. I'm not saying that you shouldn't offer appropriate solutions when those are presented, but sometimes we have to think whether or not it is better to be quiet versus loud. And then there's our remarkable presence. So this one I know gonna chafe a lot of people. Because sometimes we want to be stand out in the crowd. We want to be the important person. We want to be the person who looks the prettiest or is the cutest or is the smartest or whatever. But sometimes, and not in every situation, but sometimes you need to be in a remarkable presence, a steady, solid presence for somebody else because they are unable to do it for themselves. And sometimes people just need that. Sometimes when you're the quietest person in the room, everybody tell you everything. I know that for a fact. I'd be saying in my office at work. So I'm the furthest away from everybody. Everybody's over this side of the office. I'm over here by myself. Every minute my door's open, I just be like, but I come across here. So nobody, so I could be by myself. Because my boss was like, come across the other side. I was like, I good. I'm okay. But every time something happens in the office, somebody comes into my office to tell me. And I just be like, okay, no problem. According to one of the girls, sometimes they don't pay she no mind. I'd be like, but I can't allow everything to stress me. So I don't let everything in the office cause me to get angry. I just be like, oh, okay, no problem. Thank you for letting me know. And I go back to what I was doing. Because if I let that, I am not going to have any edges by the end of 2 months. I'm telling you, because there's always some crisis in the office when you work. Right? So patience and persistence. You always have to be patient. And you always have to be persistent in order to move forward in what it is that you're trying to do. So Joshua display had those things. Let's look at the Bible verse where we talk about display. So that's on Numbers 4, 6 to 9. So Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid. So remember we talked about the servant. In those moments, Joshua was building his faith. He was building on what God was giving him. He was learning from Moses as the servant. He was gathering all the information so that when he became the spy, even though everybody else was like, these people are giants and we are ants, Joshua was like, but God gone from them. We have nothing to worry about. Him and Caleb only. Right? And we all know what happened to the other spies. They didn't last too long. But the point is that he grew in his faith in that quiet, small beginning, in that quiet, small space. He was a servant, and he grew. And now he's a spy. And he's telling them, God is going to give us this land. So there were consequences to the people not believing. They did not believe. They did not get the land at that point in time. All of the people who were there, minus Joshua and Caleb, died out. Just because of how their unbelief. So when we have to start small, yes, but it's more about building our faith in those quiet places. So right now you may be in a, I don't even want to use job. Let me say you're in a position where, let's say at home, you may not even have the nicest house, and you may be telling yourself, but God, I want more than this. There has to be more than this. If you do not care what you have, how is God going to give you more? So you're treating the house bad, but the rain coming in on you. The rain isn't coming in on you. Like, everything up in the ground, you're not cleaning it, you're not worried about it. You're just like, whatever. It don't matter because I can get better than this. That's not how that works. Me and my sister were having a conversation, and her purse has in all of these things. And I looked at her, and I was like, you need to throw out the garbage because how God can fill it with money? She was like, yeah, true. I was like, empty the purse, nah? It got too much foolishness. Where can the money fit? The money can't fit. But that is the point. Make room. Exactly. Make room. Because God's promises are bigger and better than whatever obstacle may be coming your way. Whatever thing you may see that's out there. Going back to the same word, you might want a better job. And it may not look like if it's on the horizon. I'm not saying don't do things. Like if the courses offered, go do them. If they are, like somebody give you an opportunity to go something, go learn something. Because no knowledge is foreknowledge. No knowledge, you can use it for everything and anything. Up to this, it was this week, last week, we were interviewing some people for work, and they were like, everybody was like, oh, well, you can handle the interview, and I'm there like, me? But I knew how to do it because I have a lot of siblings. Every time they go for a job, I say, boy, who's sitting down and doing interviews with them? So they would go through questions and all that, all that. But it's not something that I thought about that would be like, a future I would be using. But in an interview, I just be like, oh, let me ask them this. So it's so easy for me to see where the ebb and flows go in the interview. So no knowledge is bad knowledge, right? You can use it for something. So look at your first the servant. Start from humble beginnings. And most of us have started from humble beginnings. I laugh about that all the time. Ask mommy, we come from poor people. Ask auntie, we come from poor people, right? You're moving from where you were before to where you are going to go. But in the movement, there's a process. So maybe in your movement, you need to be the spy that has the faith. Everybody else is seeing giants, and you're just seeing the goodness of the land, the fat of the land, the success that is coming. And seeing that is a God-given gift as well. You see it, and you know that it's going to be yours, and it's going to come to you, and it's going to come to those around you. You're going to be the one who changes it's not like we know any of Joshua's family. Does anybody know of the family of Nun? I don't know them. The Bible doesn't mention them outside of that. This seed has come from them, but he also was able to get an inheritance. So they would have benefited from those things. So we have to be in that mindset of, yes, we may be in a struggling place, but we are going forward. So let's talk about the leader. So remember we talked about the servant, we talked about the spy, and now we're talking about the leader. So Joshua was what we call a warrior leader, in that he had to fight some battles. Similar to David, in that their life was mainly fighting, right? So he taught characteristics of a leader. The leader needs to have integrity and honesty. Remember, we were saying some things overlap between the servant and the spy. So remember, if you don't start from the beginning, how you going to get them when you get to the end? Effective communication. They have to be able to communicate with persons. They have to have empathy and emotional intelligence. Visionary thinking. I know everybody thinks they're a visionary. No. You see that online, it's like, I just have a vision. No. You're talking about visionary thinking in that you're thinking about things that other people do not think about, right? You're seeing down the road. Accountability and responsibility, that's a big one, because you can't be a lone ranger as a leader. You can't be a dictatorship. I think everybody knows at this point that everybody kind of pushes against a dictatorship. So you have to be able to communicate with your people and let them know what's happening, and also be willing to change your mind about some things, which comes into decision making and decisiveness. Yes, you're going to make a decision, and that's fine. You can be the leader that makes a decision, but you also have to hear what others are saying. Delegation and empowerment. You cannot do everything yourself if you are a leader. Resilience and adaptability, and humility and curiosity. So all of those things that Joshua was building from the time he was a servant are now coming to roost now that he's a leader. Right? The Holy Spirit started him as that servant. God was talking to him, communing with him. He never wanted to leave God's presence. That's why he stayed in the tent. And that's why Moses kind of clocked it like, hey, this boy is standing behind there. Maybe he does. Maybe he is the person that we didn't think about. So when they were calling for the 12 spies, he was like, you know what? We have Joshua from Ephraim. He can go with them because he has shown himself to be strong. Why not send him? So he went along with the other 12 spies. And then when it was time to move forward, Moses was like, I know somebody, somebody that makes sense, somebody that has shown that they're interested in the things that God is interested in, and somebody who knows that, hey, we can move forward, this person can carry into that. The story is about Moses. Moses had his own trials and tribulations and all that stuff, but he mentored Joshua in a way that made him a strong leader. And because of that relationship with God, even when he wasn't feeling strong, God was able to bolster him. God told him to have courage. Can you imagine God telling you have courage? Because I am going to do something for you, so you need to kind of buck up. Like, we ready to go, or are we not ready to go? So you see Joshua, let's look at Joshua, I think it's Joshua 5. 9? 5? 5. Okay, thanks. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. This is the fall of Jericho. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" And the man said, "Neither. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have no come." Then Joshua fell down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. So this is one of my major favorite parts, because it kind of shows how small we are in relation to what God is. We often think we are fighting our battles by ourselves, and that what we have to do is so great and so insurmountable. And God is just like, but you are not fighting your battles, I am fighting them. Furthermore, it is not your battle, it is mine. So please take off your shoes, because you have not met me. So some theologians believe that this is actually Christ. And there are only a couple of places in the Old Testament where we see the angel had an appearance of a man. And oftentimes we believe that it's Jesus in those instances. And two, it said the commander of the army of the Lord. Who else would be commander of the army of the Lord outside of Jesus, right? So some theologians believe that this would be Jesus. And in saying that, can you imagine you're a servant to a man who talks to God face to face? God comes down and talks to him in a cloud. And you end up being a leader that sees Jesus face to face before anybody ever heard of him. So there is a progression, right? There is a stepwise progression into this thing. We are not doing this one day today and then tomorrow we see all of God. And that comes back to the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. If we are going to use all that God has for us, we need to do a stepwise progression. We need to get closer to him. We need to spend more time with him. We need to learn more about his word. We need to find out what it is that he wants for our life. It's about purpose. What do you want me to do? And how do I get there in the purpose that you want us to do? Sometimes we don't even want any purpose. Right? Because sometimes it's not even about the purpose. 'Cause I know we spend a lot of time talking about purpose, but if you are walking with God, the purpose is automatic, because God does not do anything haphazard. It's always, hey, we are going somewhere. The line might not be linear, but you're definitely going somewhere. So it's more important to get closer to God and to be in his presence, know what he is about, and then he will be like, go over there and do that. Go over there and do that. And at the end of the day, you will get to a point where you are like Joshua, saying, all right, let me take off my shoes, because the place where I'm standing is holy ground. And God is about to rout my enemies, and I'm not even going to, because in this case, like, it wasn't even a fight. There was nothing for Joshua and the Israelites to do. They just watched the enemy, and the enemy was destroyed, because God's army was there, right? And he's always fighting for us. So, we saw the servant, we saw the, actually, let me tell you something else before I go on. Let's go to Joshua 10. This was another one that shows where the leader went. So on the day of Joshua 10:12, so on the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, he said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you moon over the valley of Ajalon." So that the sun stood still and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. The servant Joshua could not have fathomed what God would do through him. So think about that. The servant Joshua could not fathom what God would have done through him. You imagine you're behind Moses just doing what he tells you to do. And then at some point in your life, in your future, you tell the sun to stop. Hey, we still got to kill these people, so don't worry to move. And the Bible says that he said it to God. So he didn't even address the sun, because the sun was inconsequential at that point. So he addressed God and told God this is what he wanted to happen, and God made it happen. So same way, every battle that we have to fight, God will make it happen. And the only person you need to address is God. You don't need to address the people coming against you. You don't need to address anybody outside of God. You just address God, and he will deal with your situation as it is. Whatever battle you have to fight, whether it's financial, whether it's physical, whether it's even your interpersonal relationships. Maybe you want better relationships with people, and that's something that you struggle with. Tell it to God. Be like, tell me who's not and who is. Because God can give you the spirit of discernment so that then you will know who's not and who isn't. Right? And that comes with getting closer to Him as well. So as we grow closer to Him, we will see more and more. Joshua the servant could not tell the son to stop, but Joshua the leader could, because it had, like, there was time. Over time, he would have done these things. So let's go to the last, I think this is the last slide. Pruning shapes character. Hidden seasons. Us as the servant, us as the spy. Those things build public strength because you're leading into becoming the leader. And God develops servants into leaders. You have to start at the level of a servant because that's what Jesus emulated. That's what He washed the disciples' feet. That's what He always was with the people. He was always sharing. He was always teaching. He was always doing for them, healing, loving, so that at the end He could be the leader that He is today. Right? So, I have a little homework for you. And your homework is choose 3 servant qualities to emulate, choose 3 spy qualities to embody, and choose 3 leadership qualities to keep growing in. Right? So that's your homework for this week. Think about it. The reason why I give you the homework is because if we don't know where we want to go, we can't get there. And we have to write it down. That's why we do our vision boards, and that's why we do all those other things, because you have to see it. And the Bible talks about that. Writing the vision, making it plain. If you don't know where you want to go, then you cannot get those things. So choose 3 servant qualities. That's all I'm requiring. 3 that maybe you need to work on them. 3 spy qualities that you want to embody, and 3 leadership qualities to keep growing in, to ensure that you are moving in the direction that God wants you to do. So Joshua's story, as it closes, is a story of transformation. He started as a servant, and he ended up being a warrior leader. Routing Jericho to the point that people were confused, and the men were killing each other. Right? All because he was willing, in the time when he was a servant, to dedicate himself to God. And in the time when he was a spy, to see God for who He is. And so God was able to use him in a mighty way. And a way that he probably was like, this will never happen to me. Sometimes I have that, where you're like, I want this, but maybe it'll never happen. No, it's going to happen. I remember we were talking about at the beginning with Gideon. Maybe you'll get it when you're old. Maybe that's all it is. You have to wait a little bit more time. Because if we're talking time and seasons, we know God is eternal. So He's not worried about our little bit of timing. If Joe Biden could become president at 70-something, why were you? That was his dream for every. He wanted to be president ever since, from the beginning. But nobody was taking him on at that time. But they took him on as he got older. So he still got his dream, even though it was later down. So we can get our words as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.